Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I am Kusnul Farida from English Department of B'22 Malang. Now I'm going to talk about test-based language learning. Test-based language learning focuses on the use of authentic language to complete meaningful tasks in a target language. Such tests can include visiting a doctor, conducting an interview, or calling customer service for help. Assessment is primarily based on test outcome, the appropriate completing of real-world tests, rather than on accuracy of prescribed language form. This makes test-based language learning especially popular for developing target language fluency and student confidence. So talk-based language learning, the really reason I raised this subject is because I realize just how important it is in language learning to have specific tests. I noticed this, that if I assign myself a task or if I feel an obligation to do something, or if someone assign a task to me, then I'm likely to do it simply because it's easy to have a test. Specific tasks that help get me going and like so much in life. It is important to get going, important to do something. If you do something, it leads to other things. So that's, I think, very important to keep us, going forward in our language learning activities. But when we say text-based language learning, if you Google for it, we'll find different definition. And that task-based language instruction is a method of language instruction where, as I understand it, the learner is asked to perform a test in language, not to worry about grammar, structure, or vocabulary, and to incorporate, hand gesture or whatever in order to accomplish a task in the language. Now, I don't know whether this is an active way of teaching the language. To me, in artificial, it's a bit like this role-playing thing, which is done particularly like I would rather have a conversation. I would rather spend time, acquiring information, listening to interesting podcasts, and then talk about what I've been listening to and reading, and sort of gradually see my vocabulary increase, my comprehension level increase. One example of the application of this test-based language instruction, and of course in the field of language instruction, there are all kind of, I think, language instruction comes down comprehensible, completing input, massive listening and reading, allow the brain to get used to the language, and everything else is kind of refinement, which are either interesting or not interesting, but maybe not all that necessary. Yes. And then next, number 2, difference between tests and exercises. Tests are activities in which learners are required to draw together and extend a range of elements in their framework of knowledge and skill, whereas exercise focus upon and practice specific element of knowledge, skill, and strategies needed for the test. Every test should have 5 features, among other: purpose, context, process of thinking and doing, product, and the last, activation of learners' knowledge and skill. Why text-based language learning is important? It means meaning-based but it also offers opportunities for focus on language. It is motivating because it is relevant to learners' real life needs. It involves learning by doing. So these are three rationales. As you probably realized, all of the options actually apply to test-based language learning. The advantages test-based language learning. Since the tests mimic real-life situations, students get improve their communication skill, their confidence, their motivation. Learners acquire a deeper understanding of the language. They also bond with their classmates during lesson time. Test-based learning is advantageous to the student because it is more student-centered, allow for more meaningful communication, and often provides to practical extra-linguistic skill building. Although the teacher may present language in the pretest, the students are ultimately three to use what grammar, constructions, and vocabulary they want. This allows them to use all the language they know and are learning, rather than just the target language of the lesson. Furthermore, as the tests are likely to be familiar to the student, um, students are more likely to be engaged, which may further motivate them in their language learning. For example, this would be the email questions, as very possible the student would have to write an email like that in their life, so it helps motivate them when they realize that effective test-based learning should be underlined by a proper needs analysis. So what I mean by that is the specific group of students we have in mind for teaching. You've got to find out their need. One example would be nurses learning English for professional purpose. You have to think what the nurses have to do. So, for example, they may be taking their patient medical histories or offering counseling. The tests they do when they are learning English really should reflect that. Another benefit of using tests is classroom management of. So one the advantages it is can be very easy to see if students are in task or off task. In a teacher give a student a speaking test and they go away and do it. It is very visually clear who is doing that and who isn't. So it can help controlling the class and all other factors. There are some practical challenges, but I think test-based language learning can be used to overcome challenges in the classroom, such as mixed ability learners or different learning style. Different tests can offer different learning experience to people. So it got flexibility built into it, and that is very useful as well. Uh, Another potential. The number 4, how to apply test-based language learning. The teacher presents what is expected from the student in the test phase and gives clear instruction on what they will have to do at the test stage. The pre-test stage includes a model of the test. Secondly, during the test phase, in this stage, the students complete a test depending on the type of activities. The student complete a test in pairs or groups using the language resources that they have as the teacher monitor and offers encouragement. Students prepare a short oral or written report to tell the class what happened during their task. For example, so you can use technology, for example, give students a task to go away and record the dialogue on their phone, disperse into smaller groups, and then come back later and share with the group. So these practical considerations are worth thinking about. They by no means exclude text-based language learning. The final point about that is it's definitely a student-centered activity, not material-centered. Teacher facilitate rather than lead in assessment. And as we said that education is much more effective, that we are learning by doing is much more effective than learning about something. So in other words, text-based language learning is supported by general learning theory as well. In general, text-based language learning are described in terms of three stages: the pre-test stage, the during-test stage, and the post-test stage. In the pre-test stage, usually learners prepare for the test that's going to happen. It's sort of preparation for test performance. The during test stage actually involves performing the test, and then in the post-test stage, learner usually engage in sort of follow-up activities after test performance. The aims of the pre-test stage is to prepare the performance of the test in order to make sure that the test is going to be as conducive to language learning as possible. We can make a distinction between two types of pre-test activities: language-focused pre-test activities and content-focused activities. Vocabulary and grammar that learners will find useful during test performance. For example, if your test is related to traveling, you might want to review mode of transport or how to buy ticket for a trip. It's important, however, not to spend too much time on language before test performance. On language more than meaning that during actual test. But one of the underlying principles of test-based language teaching is the focus in meaning, and that should be the aim of the during test stage. Moving from during test, this is the point in the test-based lesson when you can actually introduce an explicit focus on language. Of course, it's or to move on to another test, but now let's focus on in what ways you can achieve an explicit focus on language in the past test phase. There are a variety of ways of doing that. For example, you can ask students to repeat the test in front of the audience. Imagine that two students engage in a storytelling activity, perform their narrative again in front of the whole class. Students might have also worked on preparing a speech and delivering a speech in the during test phase. Then in the post test phase, you could ask them to deliver that speech in front of the whole class to a large audience. Another useful post-test activities is to ask students to report back to the class about their test outcome. For example, if learners engage in a decision-making test, the post-test stage could provide a platform for sharing that decision that they've reached. Finally, in the post-test phase, we could also engage learners in explicit form-focused activities. The conclusion is that using test-based language learning can increase student skill in terms write a letter in English, which be marked with increased teacher activity, student activity, and result student learning. I think that's all. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.